Raised by wolves with canine DNA in his blood, having trained more than 24,000 pets, helping you and your fur babies thrive. Live in studio with Will Bangura, answering your pet behavior and training questions. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host and favorite pet behavior expert, Will Bangura.
Would you like to go on? Keith?
Y'all ready for this?
Well, good day, dog lovers. Hey, thanks for joining me. I'm Will Bangura, certified and accredited canine behaviorist and behavior consultant and force-free dog trainer. This is the podcast where we talk about how to deal with some of the most difficult dog behavior problems that you might be facing with your dog. Maybe you've got a dog that's aggressive or reactive. Maybe you've got a dog that has anxiety, fears, phobias, obsessive compulsive behaviors. Maybe you've got a dog that's just too much, a lot of energy, and you're not exactly sure how to be able to help your dog. Well, welcome to Dog Training Today. As I said, my name is Will Bangura. We're going to be here for about the next hour where I'm going to be talking about various topics. One of the topics that I wanted to talk about today is how do you deal with multiple dogs living in the same home that are fighting? Yeah, that's one of the most difficult, most challenging behaviors that you'll ever deal with if you end up dealing with it. And one of the most challenging behaviors that behaviorists, trainers, behavior consultants, veterinary behaviorists deal with on a day-to-day basis. But do me a favor before we get into that. And also, I'm going to be taking your questions. I've got a lot of email questions I want to get to. If you're watching live and you've got a question about your dog's behavior, go ahead and type that in to the comment section down below. I'll be getting to those questions a little bit later. But do me a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You know, it always amazes me that less than half of the people that listen to the podcast on a regular basis subscribe. And you're missing a lot of great content. Do yourself a favor, hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode of Dog Training Today. So, hope everybody had a great 4th of July. Hope that you kept your dog safe. You know, the 4th of July is always a difficult day. And the weekend, a difficult weekend for dogs, especially those dogs that have sound sensitivities. And we know today that the research shows us that up to 40, and in some cases, even more than 40% of dogs have sound sensitivity issues. So the Humane Society, the rescues, the shelters, yesterday, because today's the 5th of July, today and the rest of the weekend, this is their busiest time of the year. So hopefully you have a dog that was safe last night. We did do a podcast about how to desensitize and counter condition your dog to get them comfortable with fireworks. Now, if you didn't have a chance to do that and you've got a dog that's fearful, make sure that you check out, go to the last episode that we did. And actually, I've got a few episodes that I've done on how to help your dog be comfortable with the sound of fireworks. Check that out. And next year, you won't have to deal with problems if that's something that you deal with. But like I said in the opener, what I want to talk about today and get into it, and I've got a couple other podcasts. You can do some searches through the Dog Training Today podcast and listen to them. But I wanted to visit again what we call intra-dog aggression. That's just a fancy name for dogs in the same household that are fighting. Unlike or similar to inter-dog aggression. Inter-dog aggression are when dogs fight, but they don't necessarily live in the same home. That's intra-dog aggression. Now, there's a lot of reasons why dogs can be fighting. And a lot of times we're getting hung up into trying to figure out a logical reason why dogs are fighting. I think one of the biggest challenges that pet parents have when they've got dogs in the same home that are fighting are when, well, let me paint the picture. Imagine you've got two dogs living in the same home and they've been getting along great. Matter of fact, they've been best friends, or at least you think they've been best friends for the last 5, 6, 7 years. And now all of a sudden they're fighting. And we're not talking about just a little scuffle. We're talking about dogs that are putting their teeth on one another. We're talking about dogs that are puncturing one another, maybe rips, tears. Maybe you've got to get them to the emergency hospital because they've got some physical damage to them. It could be a medical emergency. And there's nothing more heartbreaking than having dogs that you absolutely love and adore, and you've absolutely loved and adored them for years, and all of a sudden they start fighting. And the first thing I think that happens is we go into denial. Well, the first thing is shock. We're surprised by it if it comes out of the blue. And then secondly, we get into denial. We think, well, they'll work it out. And usually once these things start, they don't work it out. They don't work it out on their own. It usually gets progressively worse over time. Usually gets worse. Now, let's talk about what we can do about it, and we can talk about some of the why this might be happening, but we really need to talk about what we need to do. First and foremost, if we're talking about the real deal, you've got dogs that are hurting one another. The first thing that you need to do is you need to arrange the environment, make adjustments to your home where you can separate the dogs that are fighting so that they can't hurt each other until you've found somebody to help you. Yes, this is dangerous. This is not something that you want to try to deal with on your own. You either find yourself a behaviorist or a very skilled behavior consultant who specializes in intra-dog aggression in your area, or you find somebody who's really good at this that you can do remote sessions. I do virtual remote behavior consultations all over the world. So this can be done virtually. It's a challenge. There is no quick fix. And listen, any trainer, any dog professional that tells you that there's a quick fix for this, don't just walk away, but run away. Because the only way somebody's going to try to or believe that they can offer a quick fix is they're just going to punish the behavior. Now, they might not use the word, the big P word. They might use the big C word, correction. But correction is just a nicer word for punishment. Punishment is anything. Correction is anything that causes any level of fear, pain, intimidation, discomfort, and it could be mild. And then again, it could be very severe. The problem with correction and punishment, what's the positive side, if we could say there's a positive side? Now, I don't use punishment. I don't advocate that you do that. It's unnecessary. We know that today. There's dozens of studies, dozens of scientific studies and research that are out there. It's unnecessary. Matter of fact, it makes things worse. In the long run, for most dogs, when you use corrections, when you use punishment to deal with aggression, in the long run, for most dogs, it gets much worse. Now, temporarily, you might be able to suppress that behavior, like putting a lid on the top of a pot of boiling water. You might be able to stop that outward aggressive behavior because the dog is now intimidated or fearful of the correction or the punishment. And so it doesn't behave in the aggressive behaviors that you've been seeing. However, what's changed? What has changed? You see, dogs don't go into fight or flight just for the most part out of the blue. Okay. And it's usually not a dominance issue, especially if they've been together for years. Quite frankly, we know that most dogs that have problems with aggression, it's about anxiety. It's about stress. It's about fear that the dogs are experiencing. You see, for us, the aggression is the problem. For the dog, it's their solution. When a dog is aggressive, when they go into fight or flight, it's because they perceive something as threatening. Now, you might not think there's a threat. There might not be, to the casual observer or even the professional observer, a real threat. But if the dog perceives something as threatening, they can go into fight or flight. And so really, at the root cause of a lot of aggression, at least a big component of it, there's usually multiple contributing factors to aggression, but a huge component is anxiety, stress, fear. And that underlying emotional state of feeling uncomfortable, feeling that there is a threat, causes the dog to go into fight or flight. You see, you change the way the dog feels about the other dog or whatever the trigger might be. You change that underlying anxiety, that underlying fear, that underlying stress. You deal with that. You get that taken care of. That outward aggressive behavior goes away. All behaviors, you need to understand this. All behaviors are functional. They serve a purpose. If they didn't serve a purpose, they would extinguish over time. Dogs that are aggressive want distance and space between themselves and the trigger. Let me say that again. Dogs that are aggressive want distance and space between themselves and the trigger. In this case, we're talking about another dog in the home. So the first thing we need to do is honor that, not that it's the fix, not that it's the fix at all. And I'm not giving dogs a pass that are fighting. But the first step in the fix, not that it's the fix, the first step in the fix is we need to separate these dogs. Literally and figuratively, we need to stop the bleeding. We need to stop these dogs from continuing to rehearse these behaviors, continuing to experience what they view as a threat. Then they rehearse the behaviors. They get more and more conditioned, more and more habituated, and they get more and more difficult to get worked through. So the first thing we need to do is arrange the environment, arrange our homes, separate the dogs. Again, that's not the answer, but it's the first step. I've used the analogy many times before. Imagine that we weren't dealing with a dog aggression issue. Imagine we were dealing with a broken water pipe, and you called me up. You said, "Hey, Will," thinking I'm a plumber, "we've got a broken water pipe. We've got this mess all over. It's destroying everything. What do we do?" First thing I'm going to tell you to do is turn off the main water valve. Now, does that fix the broken water pipe? Absolutely not. But it stops further damage. And it buys you the time and the opportunity to now have success working on fixing that water pipe. Imagine trying to fix a broken water pipe and you didn't turn off the main water valve. You would be fighting a losing battle, an uphill battle. Well, it's the same thing. If you keep fighting dogs together, you're going to be fighting a losing battle, an uphill battle, and you're probably not going to have a lot of success, especially if we're talking about dogs that are really fighting, where it's more than a growl, more than a snarl, more than a snap. They're biting, they're hurting each other. So the first thing we need to do is we need to separate the dogs. Now, when we separate the dogs, that means no physical contact whatsoever under any circumstances. You need to assume that it's not a matter of if your dogs are going to have another fight, it's when. Not if, but when. And there are very specific things that we need to do. First thing we got to do is keep everybody safe. We're going to separate them. Now, we need to make sure that we've got physical barriers. They're in another room confined. They're in a dog crate confined. They're in an X pen. They're behind a baby gate. But we've got to make sure those things are secure. Sometimes One level of security is not enough. Management is difficult, especially if you have to manage something like keeping dogs away from each other for a period of time. And like I mentioned, there are no quick fixes to this. We are literally needing to condition a new underlying emotional state and response to a trigger and change the cognitive association that the dogs have with one another. That doesn't happen overnight. That is a conditioning process through a lot of counter conditioning, a lot of desensitization. There's foundational obedience exercises that we need to also work with. But before we can do that, we got to keep everybody safe, and not just for a day, not just for a week. We're talking, in many cases, the clients that I work with, and this is all I do, 3 to 6 months to get to the best place. And in some cases, with dogs that are fighting in the same home, there's a maintenance phase that might be another year after that. Now, if we get through this quicker, that's icing on the cake. But you cannot rush through this process. You rush through this process, you cut corners, and it's going to cost you another fight. And there's no guarantee. And run from any trainer that guarantees you, I'll fix the aggression. Listen, there's no guarantee. There's a high probability if we do things right, we can make things a lot better. But there's never a guarantee. If you've got dogs that are fighting in the home, it's like having special needs kids. You don't get to live your life without supervising them, even after you've done the work, if you're smart. All right, so we've separated the dogs. Oftentimes, one level of security is not enough. Imagine if you've got a dog that you're confining in another room. And maybe you've got door handles that are not the round knob type, but the lever types. Well, a lot of dogs can jump on those, get the door open. Some will actually put their mouth on it and open it. Okay. So if you find that you've got one of those doors, you need a second level of security, whether that mean once the dog, if it gets out of that room into the hallway, do you have a baby gate also? So if the first level of security failed, you've got a second barrier. Or let's say that you've got a dog in a crate and they escape the crate. Can they get to the other dog? I encourage everybody, if you've got dogs that are really fighting, if it's the real deal, have at least 2 layers of security. A dog in a crate in a room, the door to the room closed. A dog in a crate. If it gets out, it's in a hallway, there's a baby gate. At least 2 layers of security, because management fails. We're humans. And if you've got to keep dogs apart for 3 to 6 months, and hopefully it's not that long, but still, many of us will make a mistake well before that. And that could mean the difference between huge success and huge failure, and your dog's getting hurt. 2 layers of security, 2 barriers. Now, in some cases, dogs not only need to be completely physically separated, but visually they should not be seeing one another. If the way that you've got things set up, the way that you've got them separated, they can see each other. And when or if they see each other, they're in any kind of stress, whether that be mild or big distress. They can't see each other. The whole goal here is we want to decompress everything. If the dogs keep having stressful experiences, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're fighting, they could see each other through a gate and be growling. That's not a positive experience. They're continuing to get a negative experience conditioned. They continue to see the other dog as a threat. We can't have that. So in some cases, dogs can't see each other. Other situations, it could be even more severe, where the dogs can't not only be near each other, they can't see each other, they can't hear each other. In some cases, we may have to have white noise machines to mask some of the sound as well. Okay? Now, we've got everything safe. We've got them separated. We're now into management. Management doesn't fix the behavior, but it can stop the behavior. It is extremely rare that you can't stop a behavior with management. If you're managing things well, you can stop the behavior. But it's a Band-Aid right now, and I get it. This is not the answer. Now, after we've got everything safe, what do you do next? You make an appointment with your veterinarian. You get both those dogs in for a good medical exam. We need to rule out that there's nothing medically that's a contributing factor to the behavior. Hey, especially if they've been getting along just fine, and then all of a sudden, on a dime, things change. Oftentimes, pain might be a contributing factor. Hormonal imbalances might be a contributing factor. There's all kinds of things that can be contributing factors. I'm not a veterinarian. That's not my area of expertise. But you do need to take them to the vet, rule out any possible medical contributing factor. Because no amount of training or behavior modification is going to change a medical component to aggression. So we want to do that right away as well. All right, what's our next step? Well, at some point, we're going to want to bring these dogs back together. And when we do that, it needs to be a very gradual, very systematic, very structured, very planned reintroduction over time. And when we do that, we've got to make sure things are safe. So the next thing that you need to do is get 2 really good muzzles for your dog and start what I call positive force-free muzzle conditioning for the dogs. Listen, no dog likes to wear a muzzle. However, we can take a little bit of time over a few weeks, maybe a month, to positively condition the dog to a muzzle. Now, what's a good muzzle? A wire basket muzzle is usually going to be the best type of muzzle for your dog. They can breathe better. It's more open. It's more freeing. A lot of the wire basket muzzles are a lot safer as well. I like to get mine at a website, 4dogtrainers.com. Here's a plug for them. I don't make anything off of this, but 4dogtrainers.com, F-O-R, dog trainers with an S.com. Click on the muzzle section. Look at the wire basket muzzles. They're also going to have a chart, how to measure your dog so you can get a really well-fitting muzzle. There'll be a video down below that will also talk about how to measure your dog. You'll plug in those measurements and you'll get a really good custom-fitting muzzle for your dog. Now, once those muzzles come in, we don't want to just slap them on the dog's face. That's horrible. That'd be like me taking a straitjacket and just throwing it on you without any warning. You wouldn't love that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that wire basket muzzle and I'm going to make it vertical rather than horizontal. Yeah, we fit it horizontally, right? But we're going to make it vertical right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap some saran wrap around the outside of the wire basket muzzle. I'm going to start throwing some really yummy treats, some chicken, maybe a little kibble, cheese, maybe a couple pieces of hot dog inside of that muzzle. I'm turning it into a bowl. And I'm making this a really fun, positive experience. Dog sticking its snout in there, eating yummy treats, very high value. And listen, the higher the value, the more interested your dog and more motivated your dog's going to be to get their snout in the muzzle, which is something they typically don't like. Now, when they put their snout in the muzzle, I want you to label that behavior. You're going to capture that behavior and you're going to say, muzzle. Yeah. And then pull it away, present it. They stick their snout in there and you're going to go, muzzle. They eat a little bit, pull it away. Present it again. They stick their snout in there, say, muzzle. So you're starting to associate that word muzzle with their snout getting in there and positive things. Now, once they've loved this, maybe you've done this for 3-4 days, a week or so. Now, get that saran wrap off of that muzzle. Okay. And what I like to do is I like to take a little piece of packing tape, clear packing tape, and I put it inside the muzzle. Okay. So imagine that this is the muzzle, right? So I got a clear packing tape right there. Goes on the dog like that. There are snouts in there. And I put a smear of peanut butter or some kind of yummy food paste there. And now it's going over their nose like this. And they're licking the yummy food paste or a little smear of peanut butter that's in there. And now while they're doing that, now I'm messing with the straps. Yeah, I'm messing with the straps. They're feeling a little pressure on their snout. And again, I pull it away, put it back on, pull it away. I haven't buckled it yet. I'm just messing with the straps. If they show me they're comfortable, then I'll go ahead and buckle the strap and I'll unbuckle it and take it off. Put it back on, buckle it, unbuckle it, take it off. When they're comfortable with me putting it on, buckling it, and then taking it off, then we start going for short, very short, daily walks with the muzzle on. One dog at a time, not together. We're not bringing them together yet. Why do we go for a walk? Well, if their feet are moving, imagine their front paws coming up and down off the ground. It's hard to keep walking and try to use those paws to pull that muzzle off at the same time, which a lot of dogs will try to do early on. So keeping them moving. And if they try to do it, move a little faster. Also, you want to intermittently be pushing rewards through that wire basket muzzle, making this a positive experience for them. Start off with about 2 or 3 minutes. Very quickly. What is quickly? After a couple days. Work your way into about 15 minutes. Then start having them wear it a little longer in the house. So after maybe 2 weeks, they're wearing it a little bit longer, maybe up to 15, 20 minutes. They're in the house, have a leash on the dog, and you're just getting them used to the muzzle. And anytime they try to paw at it, grab the leash and just start moving your dog around a little bit. Start giving your dog more treats. Make it a positive experience for your dog. Listen, they've got to get used to it. And you don't want to take too much time. Obviously, you want this to be a positive experience, but you don't want to take forever with this either. A lot of times I watch pet parents, they just go too slow. They either go too fast or too slow. We need the Goldilocks approach. We need to get it just right, okay? Now, we've got some foundational behaviors that we need to train in the dogs. 2 things we absolutely must have from the dogs. They have to be able to stay put. And the best way to begin to teach this is by teaching a place command or go to your bed, go to your spot. Now, I have found the most effective way to get your dog staying is on one of these elevated dog cots. You know, they got kind of the mesh material. They're up off the ground a couple inches. A lot of people try to use dog beds or cushions that are raised up a little bit. They are not nearly as effective as an elevated dog cot. I've been doing this professionally for over 35 years, teaching that behavior. And if you really want to teach a dog to stay, not just when things are calm and quiet, but when all hell's breaking loose, you start by doing it on one of those elevated dog cots. There's something about that little bit of elevation. There's something about that break, that gap between the top of that dog cot, that gap, and the floor. That's very different than just a cushion that has no gap. There's something about that physical outline that helps dogs understand to stay. There's something about that couple inch drop with that gap of space that helps dogs to stay. It's kind of like a psychological cliff effect. Once you teach your dog to stay on that with lots of distractions, getting them to stay in a sit stay, a down stay off of that becomes an easy transition. But we have got to get them to stay. So getting an elevated dog cot, teaching a place command. And then I like to create a back tie. So I might have that elevated dog cot, say one of them next to a couch where I've got a leash wrapped around the couch leg and I can hook that to the dog's collar or harness when the dog's on that elevated dog cot. And if it tries to get off, maybe the front paws can get off that much of the cot, only a few inches. They really can't get anywhere. That back tie, whether it be a leash wrapped around a piece of furniture that's heavy enough where the dog, if it tries to pull, can't get away, or whether, in some cases, we're actually putting an eye bolt into a stud in the wall and actually hooking a back tie to that. A back tie is just a very short line or leash. And again, that's going to be important for safety down the road, because eventually we're going to have these dogs on these dog cots. They're going to be at a distance, but little by little, they'll get closer and closer and closer. But we've got to make sure if we're not standing right there, they can't get off and nail one another. They can't get far enough off and nail one another and bite one another. And they're going to be wearing muzzles, but we don't want them even fighting or muzzle punching. But we're quite a ways away from that right now. We're not there yet. So we're going to be doing a lot of work teaching place. And if you need to understand how to teach place, you can go to my website at dogbehaviorist.com. Go to dogbehaviorist.com. Look at my articles. Find the article on how to teach place. There's also a couple videos embedded in that article. Now, if you also are looking for information on positive muzzle conditioning, force-free muzzle conditioning, you can go to my other website at phoenixdogtraining.com. Go to my blog at phoenixdogtraining.com and look for the guide on muzzle conditioning. A very extensive guide. Everything you need to know is in that guide. You can use that. That will help you. All right. So we've done muzzle. We've separated the dogs. We've gotten a vet visit. We've checked everything out medically. We're doing muzzle conditioning, positive muzzle conditioning. We are teaching the dog separately to go to place and stay on place with heavy distractions. And when you're teaching place, there's really three components. There's the component of your dog understanding place means get on that cot, break or free or okay means they can come off. That's the first component. The second component is teaching them to stay there with heavy distractions. Place is worthless if they can't stay. And if they can only stay for a mild distraction, that's worthless. So component 2, working on heavy distractions. Component 3 is teaching them to stay there for long duration. So you need to be practicing all of those on a daily basis. How long is long duration? Every day, an hour. And this can be done during your downtime. You can just be hanging out, reading the paper. Does anybody read the paper anymore? Shows my age, right? Getting on the computer, watching TV, reading something for an hour. Every time they come off, put them back on. Intermittently reward the dogs. Okay? Now, the next thing that we need to do is teach the dogs to come when called. Listen, there are 2 foundational obedience training, typical obedience training exercises. I know it's not politically correct to call it obedience anymore. There are 2 behaviors we want to teach in. 1, go to place and stay there. 2, come when called. Every single time, no matter what. You need to have an incredibly strong recall. Matter of fact, you should have an emergency recall. Here too, to learn how to train in a very strong come command, an emergency recall, go to my website at dogbehaviorist.com. Go to the articles. There's over 100 articles there for you to go through. Lots of great information. You can find out exactly how to teach that come command. All right. The third thing that I like to teach that I think is a must is getting your dog's eye contact, getting their attention. And that should be done with their name, because that gets their attention. And then bridge, pair, look, watch, something like that. So one of my dogs' name is Boo. Okay. She was born on Halloween, scared to death. Boo was a great name for her. So I would go, boo, 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 looks at me, watch. And then I'm going to mark and reward. Listen, if you don't know what markers are, if you're not using a clicker or not using a marker system, an auditory verbal marker to signal to your dog the behavior is getting a reward, because timing is critical. Those of you that don't know, you've got about 0 to a half a second to get the food reward, the positive reinforcement to your dog in its mouth from the time a behavior occurs for them to connect the dots. You've got this tiny little small window of opportunity. Now, it's critical that you use markers. So if you don't understand what a marker training system is, if you don't understand what a clicker is, and you don't have to use a clicker. A lot of people use the word yes or nice, super. They might cluck their, do that for their marker. Heck, with deaf dogs, I used a visual marker. That meant, hey, you're getting a food reward. Because what you can do is you can click your clicker or say yes once a dog's conditioned to that marker that they're getting a food reward much faster than you can get food to the dog, especially if they're at a distance from you. Again, if you don't know about marker training, clicker training, go to my website, dogbehaviorist.com. There's an article and a podcast on that as well. And always, hey, these topics have been covered before. Check some of the past Dog Training Today podcast. All right. So we've taught our dogs to place. They can stay there with distractions. They're comfortable wearing a muzzle. They will come when called. We can say their name and watch, and they'll look at us. And we also teach that sustained focus. All right. We're going to continue to practice that on a day-by-day basis. And we want to generalize those trained behaviors in lots of different environments. Don't just do it in one spot in your house. Don't just do it in your front yard. Don't just do it in your backyard. Don't just do it at your neighbors. Don't just do it at the Home Depot. Don't just do it at the park. Do it everywhere. Everywhere. This is about saving your dogs. You know, the one thing, the biggest heartbreak and the biggest fear every pet parent has, I may have to rehome or euthanize one of the dogs that I've loved for years. And they can't bear the thought of it. And I get it. I get it. I've got 2 dogs. If I was dealing with this, and I deal with this with pet parents every single day, very emotional thing. So do your work. This is not easy. It is not easy, but there's a lot that can be done. In some cases, some dogs may need medication in conjunction. Medication doesn't usually cure anything, not behaviorally, but it can help. But that's a decision for a veterinary behaviorist. When I consult with clients, a lot of times I'm referring them to a veterinary behaviorist, and we work hand in hand. But not all situations are that severe. But in some cases, you do need it. Doesn't necessarily mean they'll be on medication for the rest of their life. Now, again, I'm not a veterinarian. I'm not giving out medical advice. These are topics for the vet. All right. Now, the gold standard in changing the way your dogs feel about one another, the gold standard in changing your dog's perception of your other dog as a threat. You know, right now, if you've got dogs that are fighting, they're viewing each other as a threat. They're viewing each other as scary. They're aggressing because they want distance and space. So when we start to bring them together, we're using what's called counter conditioning and desensitization. Hey, I've got some great guides. I've got some great podcasts on counter conditioning and desensitization. What am I going to tell you to do? That's right. Go to dogbehaviorist.com. Look for the articles on counter conditioning and desensitization. You'll also find there's a short guide and a long guide on counter conditioning and desensitization. But counter conditioning and desensitization is where we're changing your dog's underlying emotional state and their cognitive association, their perception with the trigger. In this case, each of the dogs are triggers to one another. We also need to, before we do counter conditioning and desensitization, and think of it as exposure therapy, all right? where we're pairing positive reinforcement in a very specific, nuanced way, in a very controlled, planned out session and setup. And that's the only way the dogs see each other right now, through a very controlled, very structured, diagrammed, planned exposure therapy, counter conditioning, and desensitization session. When you're doing counter conditioning and desensitization, listen, you've got to do this 4 times a week minimum, or forget it. Just forget it. Yeah, I'm going to be that bold. 4 times a week minimum. Now, the sessions, these counter conditioning and desensitization behavior modification training sessions, they're short. They're 5-10 minutes long. You can do that. Anybody can do that. And you can do short sessions more than once a day, especially if they're 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Okay? So when we're doing counter conditioning and desensitization, there's a lot to it. I want you to check out do a search for the Dog Training Today podcasts on counter conditioning and desensitization. But in a nutshell, and there's a lot more to this than what I'm just going to say right here. Listen, it takes weeks and months to teach clients to do this, and you got to give little tweaks here, little tweaks there. Make sure you hire a professional. If you can't find somebody good, get in touch with me. Send me an email at info@dogbehaviorist.com. We can talk about and see if maybe I can help you virtually. In most cases, I can. But counter conditioning and desensitization, we start by presenting your dogs where they can see each other, but we start at a very big distance from one another. How far apart do we need to start? Well, that is all going to depend upon your dog's emotions. How do they feel? If your dogs are concerned, if there's any level of stress, definitely if they're reacting outwardly. But even if there's a level of stress that your dog's experiencing, you're too close too soon. Yeah, the water pipe might not be gushing water all out if they're just showing stress. It might be trickling out, but still hard to fix that water pipe if the water's not completely off. So when we talk about avoiding the triggers, when we talk about doing counter conditioning and desensitization, there's a term that we use, and that's threshold. And I like to talk about 2 thresholds. One, outward threshold, or more of an overt threshold. Hey, listen, if your dog's reacting aggressively, vocally, barking, snarling, snapping, you're way too close. We shouldn't be seeing or hearing any of that when they see each other. The other thing that we need to understand, it'd be nice if we could ask the dogs, hey, on a scale from 1 to 10, how you feeling? To make sure that they don't have a care in the world. That's right, that they don't have a care in the world. When they come together, that distance where we start, when they first see each other, has to be far enough away. They see each other, they know that they're there, but they don't have a care in the world. There might be a little curiosity, but they don't have a care in the world. The only way you're going to know that, because you can't read your dog's mind, is to understand canine body language. Yes, we can't ask them. No, we can't ask them, how are you feeling, and have them tell us. But we can determine what their underlying emotional state is by reading canine body language. And let me tell you, it's not as easy as you think. I know all of you think you can read your dog. Well, what you're typically reading are the very big, very overt signs that are really obvious. And many of you will tell me they broke into a fight. There was no warning, absolutely no warning. It just, boom, it just happened. Never. That never is the case. There were little, tiny, subtle warnings, little, tiny, subtle signs in their canine body language that you didn't know were tiny little signs. You didn't know were canine body language, that you didn't know were dogs communicating, hey, I'm uncomfortable, I need space. And one or both dogs did not heed that subtle communication in canine body language to give each other space, and a fight ensued. But it escalates. It's kind of like a ladder. And at the bottom rungs of that ladder, very difficult to see tiny micro expressions, little canine body language gestures that literally you've got to study. There are big fat books, textbooks on canine body language. There are online video courses that are hundreds of hours of study. Imagine if you had a deaf child and you had to learn American Sign Language. That's a visual communications language, right? If you picked up a book on American Sign Language and went through it once, you think you're going to be interpreting at the hearing impaired convention? No. You'd have to go through that book and study and study and study. So one of the big things, huge component, all of my clients need to do is study canine body language. Not only so that you know the distance you're working at to begin with, your dog doesn't have a care in the world, but gradually, systematically, we're going to bring the dogs closer and closer and closer. And it's your dog's feedback in their canine body language that's critical. If at any point in counter conditioning and desensitization, at any point we're doing exposure therapy, at any point we're getting the dogs closer and closer back together, either one of them shows even the slightest sign that they're uncomfortable, we've gotten too close too soon. We can only work as fast as the dogs can do this. All right. Now, even before we start to bring them together, and there's more to it than just bringing them together and feeding treats, but even before we do that, when they're separated, we can begin to do a little bit of counter conditioning and desensitization through scent swapping. Now, best way to do this is you're going to get a towel, get a brand new one, doesn't have any scent on it. Don't wash it, don't launder it so it's got detergents on it. Take that towel, make sure you put latex gloves on, make sure you've got a gallon Ziploc bag. Rub that towel all over one of your dogs, okay? All over their side, their flank, their back. Just don't rub it on their face or their private parts. Rub it all over for about 30 seconds. Put it in that Ziploc bag, label it, which dog it is. Do the same thing for the second dog. It's got its own towel. Change your latex gloves. Don't contaminate scent on one to the other. Have a different, separate gallon Ziploc bag and do the same thing with that new towel. Wipe it all over the other dog's side, back, flank for about 30 seconds. Put it in the Ziploc bag. Anytime you go in there to grab that towel, have a new set of latex gloves on. So, dog A, dog B. We got two scents. Dog B, that scent gets presented to dog A. Dog A, that scent gets presented to dog B. This is done separately. They don't see each other. You grab the towel, let the dog sniff it. When they sniff it, you mark and reward. Remove the towel. Bring the towel close, let them sniff, mark, reward, remove the towel. Do that about 5 times. Do that as many times throughout the day as you can. That scent on that towel, I know you're going to ask, that scent on the towel is good for about 30 days. I like to rescent them in about 2 to 3 weeks. But they're good for at least even more than 30 days, really. But, the better the scent, the better the process. So we can begin creating a positive association with each of the dogs before they ever see each other by pairing positive reinforcement with the presentation of the other dog's scent. Okay, scent swapping, we call that. Then when we get into counter conditioning and desensitization with the dogs, we've got one person controlling one dog at a distance. We've got another person controlling the other dog at a distance. One of the dogs comes into view. As soon as they see each other, you start feeding these dogs incredibly high value food rewards. Incredibly high value food rewards. I like a food paste, like a chicken food paste. And we're going to feed constantly and continuously for about 3 to 5 seconds. Then one of the dogs goes out of sight and feeding stops for both. And we're going to rinse and repeat. Bring them back into view, feed, constantly and continuously for about 3 to 5 seconds. Dog goes out of view, stop feeding. So it's really important that the feeding starts as soon as the dogs see each other. And then as soon as they start to separate, feeding stops. It's got to be incredibly black and white. You don't want to do long sessions. You want them to be really hungry. You want them to love the food. You want it to be short. What is short? 5-10 minutes. And you want it to be very frequent. Don't do this exercise after they've eaten. Do it before you've fed them so that they're really hungry. And again, you need to do this at least 4 times a week, and hopefully you're doing it more than once a day. Other than that, they don't see each other. Remember, they're separated. Now, if we're starting at a distance, they don't necessarily have to have their muzzles on, but as soon as you get them slightly conditioned, you want to start using those muzzles, but they also need to wear the muzzles when they're not together. I don't want equipment, especially not a muzzle, to signal, oh, I'm going to see the scary thing that I used to fight with. Okay? Now, over time, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, that initial safe distance, the dog's underlying emotional state starts neutral. But as we keep pairing positive reinforcement with the black and white presentation of the dog, at some point, this becomes a very predictable pattern, very predictable positive pattern. That means incredibly wonderful food is going to happen. So these dogs that at a safe distance had a neutral emotional state, after a couple of weeks, could be sooner, could take a little bit more, but after some conditioning, when they can predict what's going to happen, that underlying emotional state that was neutral at that safe distance now has a positively conditioned emotional response, a positively conditioned emotional state that is elicited when the stimulus of the trigger is present. When we can see the dog enjoying this and loving this little game, that means we get to move a little closer. Just a little. Don't get greedy. Many of you are getting greedy. Many of you are moving in too close too soon. Again, you've got to be able to read the body language. You've got to keep the dog not just below threshold where they're not reactive, but you need to keep them below an emotional threshold where they don't have a care in the world. Listen, every time you're doing these exposure sessions, every time you're doing counter conditioning and desensitization, the distance that the dogs need to be apart is the distance where they don't have a care in the world. And you pair that with positive reinforcement over and over and over until the dog loves the dog being presented at that distance. Now you get to move a little closer. And you start conditioning the new distance because you went from neutral to positive, a little closer, neutral to positive, a little closer, back to neutral, condition positive, a little closer, back to neutral, condition positive. Now, there's a lot to a trigger. It's one thing if the trigger dog is stationary and calm. It's a whole different ball game if that trigger dog is barking, super high energy, spinning around. The more excitability, the more stimulation can cause dogs to get more anxious and they can trigger faster or more intensely. Or that can be part of the triggers because there's a thing called trigger stacking. All right. Just the sight of another dog could be a trigger. But then that dog barking could be an additional trigger. So you need to break down these triggers. Imagine that triggers are like a recipe, and there are different ingredients, right? Distance is an ingredient. Energy of the dog is another ingredient. Vocalization could be an ingredient. How fast the dog is moving, speed. How much volume with the vocalization. All those things. There could be triggers that elicit these behaviors of barking, like a doorbell ringing, door knocking. Well, anytime I've got to add a little piece of criteria, which means I'm adding another ingredient. I'm going to do one ingredient at a time. I'm going to do the least offending ingredient first. And I'm going to add one ingredient at a time. So let's say that I had the dogs calm at a distance and I was able to get them closer and closer and closer, and they love it. But now I want to start adding animation. I want to start adding a little barking, a little bit of energy, a little bit of movement and speed. I'm going to back those dogs way back up again. I'm going to start at a very far safe distance, and I'm going to start all over with that new ingredient, that other component or that other characteristic. So triggers have lots of characteristics, and you've got to be able to break them down into all these little tiny pieces. And you've got to do counter conditioning and desensitization, pairing positive reinforcement gradually, systematically, slowly, always reading their body language to make sure you're not working faster. You're not working faster than the dog is. Because if you're working faster than the dog, you're not going to have success. The dog determines the pace. Okay? Now, there's a lot more to this process. This is just part one. Make sure that you check back next week on the Dog Training Today podcast, because I'm going to be talking about what do you do next? What is part two for counter conditioning and desensitization? What is part two for behavior modification when you have dogs that are fighting in the same home? How do you continue to help them? What is the next step? What do you need to do? Well, folks, we are out of time. It is 10 o'clock. I wanted to get to a few questions. I'm not going to be able to do that today. But if you've got a question, do me a favor. Email that to me at info@dogbehaviorist.com. info@dogbehaviorist.com. And I'll be sure to get to it one of these weeks, hopefully next week. Please give us a like, give us a share, and if you love what we do, give us a 5-star review. Thanks, everybody. I'm out of here. Have a good weekend.